Okay, so we've got a map of California that Jim sent. Uh, Anybody have a particular area of California that is um, nice?
Like nothing,
Yeah,
the state of nothing.
the great nothing there, right? Jeffersonia would be overlapping with rednecks. Um, and yeah, and then Northern California is basically Oregon, so I like that. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead here. Tidbits follow up. Last week, I showed this, and Trump is saying Ukraine may be Russian, but then later on he says, or maybe it won't be Russian, and he wanted the rare metals just so we don't feel stupid. 500 billion. Well, this week Zelensky rejects U.S. proposals because he wasn't represented and it was too slanted to the United States. No surprise there. Just a brief tidbit. We're all reading about Elon Musk. He is failing, though, to cut the deficit. He's doing everything else but cutting the deficit. And in fact, it's actually risen. If you look at the layouts over the months since Biden in 2024, the outlay from the federal government has gone up, and okay, inflation. But he's promised to trim 2 trillion out of 7 trillion. The only problem is that two-thirds of that is mandatory expenditure, Social Security and health care. And then you got interest payments at interest payments of 10%. So that only leaves about 25% for discretionary spending, and half of that is defense, which the Republicans want to increase. Musk is only looking at about a tenth of the overall budget in the first place. Now, I thought this was interesting. This is GAO estimates, not Musk, but fraud, 6.7%. And even if you could eliminate all fraud, that's only 400 billion only. And so the USAID cuts that we've been reading about, that was only 75 billion only, a relative term, 0.6% of federal spending. And so, yeah, there may be more mass layoffs, but they're bumping up against the legal system, and I'll be talking about that quite a bit. Um, the House of Representatives, I really like this guy, Hakeem Jeffries, and he's giving us hope. He's focusing on stealing taxpayer money, money intended for Medicaid, uh, which is a legal budget order, and he's going to use his power for the upcoming funding bill. So stay tuned. The government's going to shut down, and Hakeem Jeffries is framing it as Trump's going to pay a price for his power grab. So hooray for Hakeem. In the Senate, the senator from Hawaii is using this strange power that senators have, which is a blanket hold on nominees. And he's targeting the State Department. Marco Rubio has said that he'll administer U.S. aid in the State Department. And so that guy says, fine. Schatz says, fine, but I'm going to hold up all your nominations indefinitely. So this U.S. aid is still a live fight. It's not a done deal. So I was curious, how often do Republicans use this power? Just one senator can hold on nominations. Well, Rand Paul did it for the CIA director over foreign policy. Chuck Grassley did it over judicial philosophy of nominations. John McCain, interestingly, did it for LGBTQ issue. Tom Cotton, unsurprisingly, did it for national security. And the only Democrat here is Elizabeth Warren, who used it for nominees to the financial and regulatory apparatus. The guy that I'm featuring today is Ezra Klein's guest, Yuval Levin. Yes, Michael.
You forgot Tommy Tuberville holding up things because of there was something about all the advancements for Army guys or military guys.
Oh, yeah. Good.
Tommy Tuberville held up the works for a while.
Yeah, good point.
It was because the military was allowing abortions, I believe.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Thanks, guys. That's a good example. All right, so the breaking of the constitutional order, I think Ezra thinks it's already broken, but Yuval Levin is going to assuage him a little bit. I've listened to this guy. I listen in on conservative theoreticians, and he's a very reasonable guy, I would say. And I think Ezra thinks he is too. So I introduced the Constitution by just pointing out who was the ghost at the dinner table when the founding fathers were writing the Constitution. And it was Oliver Cromwell, who, when the founding fathers were in their formative years, it had only been 100 years that the Pilgrims had launched a freedom of religion issue. The Puritans probably would be better word for it, in Parliament in the 1640s. And they went up against royal power and the Anglican state religion. That mushroomed. Ultimately, it led a couple of decades later to the Glorious Revolution, which was really led to the first constitutional monarchy, quite a victory for Parliament, which Oliver Cromwell, you see him arguing wearing the Puritan dress in Parliament. But on the way, there was a civil war. There was a regicide. Charles I was beheaded. There was a big invasion of Ireland, which the Irish still talk about. And then there was a dictatorship. And when Cromwell tried to pass power to his son, that was enough. And there was a restoration of Charles I's son, Charles II, who became the first constitutional monarch, restoration. So that's the background for the atmosphere in which political philosophers were operating 100 years later. Ezra posted the podcast. and said he was proud. It was a measured dialogue that studied all the comments that was going on and gave a perspective, a comforting perspective from this constitutional scholar, Yuval Levin. And of course, the topic was the limits of presidential power. And Ezra praised him, smartest thinkers. He knows how government works. He's calmer about what's going on than I am. And he helped me think it through. And the important point is Yuval Levin is less impressed at what Trump is actually getting done than most Democrats, Ezra knows. We're all, our hair's on fire, but Yuval Levin, like me, has less hair to be on fire, but he is reassuring on that front. So he points out that this is typical for the initial reaction with any new president. And I think we can all remember how it was with George Bush. He pulled out of the Kyoto Accord. The Republicans certainly remember with Obama because he came in with a filibuster-proof Senate, and their hair was on fire. And then, of course, we all remember Trump won and all that. So Levin points out it doesn't take the opposition long. They're usually back. It's a couple of weeks. And I think maybe it's taken a month this time. But yesterday being a holiday, we saw big protests. And looks like the wind is blowing in Democrat sails again. He thinks it's an illusion for Democrats to fret that the Trump team is better prepared and they're going to be more competent than they were the first time. He's saying, no, they're making the same mistakes they made the first time. Around 8 years ago. There's chaos. They think it's strategic chaos, but it's just garden variety chaos. And it really didn't work back then, and it's not going to work now. So very reassuring. We remember back then, this time around, there's a freeze on federal grants, but back then it was the travel ban right out of the chute. And protesters were going to airports, and it was the same strategy, if you could call it a strategy, which appeals to Donald Trump to do something big all at once. But Levin says, fine, do that, but think it through a little bit better. You haven't thought it through just like you didn't the last time. And he holds up an example. If you really want to cut stuff, look back at what W. Bush did. It kind of broke our hearts to see Democratic programs cut, but they were cut and they stayed cut. And this is because Mitch Daniels, the former governor of my original home state, Indiana, he was the budget director then. And the way you do it is you get all the stakeholders in a room that want to cut the department, and you ask hard questions, and then even what seem to be stupid questions, because it's the stupid questions that often unveil important information. I remember this phenomenon in The Fog of War, where Robert McNamara is talking about trying to find a way to approach Khrushchev. and nobody had good answers at the table. But in the back of the room, some guy had been an attaché in Moscow and pointed out that Khrushchev goes to his DACA, and he bumped into him one day, and he thinks he was a reasonable guy that you could approach. And it kind of changed the thinking in the room. So you just got to get a lot of people in the room where it happens. And Levin gives the example of Trump could have avoided screwing up badly on this decision, but if someone had raised their hands and said, well, say, if you're going to shut down the Medicaid payment portal like they tried to do, the payments actually go to hospitals. And are we supposed to shut hospitals down? And then that would have stopped the whole thing in its track. Instead, they just did it. They just did it and put hospitals at risk and had to backtrack. So it's important to get a lot of people around the table. And this is the comeuppance here. It's hospitals in red states too. And so all this thumping of the chest, it's that you're actually showing your weakness. And you had to retreat from confusion over Medicaid funding. So it gets also to the basic theory of what MAGA stereotypes of federal employees are. And Levin invites us to think about, well, why don't you consider this kind of federal employee, a primary care VA doctor, and you're offering to buy them out, give them salary all the way to September. Well, they're the ones that could get a more lucrative job some other place, or the Department of Energy. Maybe you're getting rid of somebody who's really competent and super dedicated because they care about climate change. And I keep mentioning this Michael Lewis book because it's the best book on the deep state. What is the deep state? And he really gets at what it is, and that it involves a lot of civil servants that have particular passions because of their upbringing. I remember one guy he interviewed was in helping with Department of Agriculture and food stamps because of his family's poverty growing up. So he gives all these examples of people that are dedicated. Somebody at the National Weather, NOAA, because they grew up in Kansas and were subject to tornadoes. A really good book that puts flesh and bones on what the deep state really is. The fifth risk, by the way, he gives the top four risks of not having a good transition, and the transition, the first transition between Obama and Trump was terrible, and that's when he decided to write the book. The fifth risk is what you don't know about, the one that no one knows about. So the federal workforce. It's about the same size as it was 50 years ago, even though the population is up. So how could that be? Well, contractors are a lot more prominent. And then Levin takes the example of the Food and Drug Administration. Right? He thinks they're actually stretched pretty thin right now, and he's a conservative. And there's already a retention problem because of salary caps. particularly in the health sector. So if you look at somebody at the Food and Drug Administration, or as we said, a VA a doctor, they can make a lot of money in the private sector, and they're the ones that are most likely to go. Yes, Robert.
Just a comment on the government has a lot more contractors than it did then. Well, this is true. I was talking to someone who lives in DC, and his daughter was fired actually from USAID on January 31st during the evening, along with 500 or so of her fellow career workers in the Bureau of Global Health within USAID. But she was fired and not offered the 8-month pay because she worked for a contractor. And that's the case, apparently. I think there are 2.3 million government workers on the list of in the books of personnel management, but there are 4 million who are actually on the payroll of these contractors, who are known in Washington as Beltway bandits. And because they are paid by a contractor, although on the same scale as the government department itself, and with the same career prospects, etc., since the money is paid out to the Beltway bandit, and that ceased, that was stopped on that Friday night, she was fired immediately by the Beltway bandit, which more regularly known as a personnel management corporation. And that's how it looks like government numbers have stayed the same for decades, 2 or 3 decades. But in fact, there's twice as many people employed by contractors.
Ah, that's interesting. Thanks for filling that in. Okay. So
I'm not condoning the firings. I'm just saying, trying to describe a little bit the situation.
yeah, no. There's almost twice as many Beltway bandits as regular. That's an interesting fact. But if you're offered this buyout and you're sitting across the table from somebody who is making twice as much as you are at, say, Pfizer, and you're at the Food and Drug Administration, that gives you pause. I could have that lifestyle. And so it's going to be hardest to replace the very people who are most likely to leave. And Trump is really going after FDA, which doesn't seem wise. Innocent bystanders, let's go back to 4 years ago. There's going to be plenty of innocent bystanders this time. But for 4 years, soybean farmers in our Midwest have lost out big time. They no longer sell tons and tons of soybeans to China. China buys them from Brazil instead. And so hurting the farmers. Levin's biggest point is, what can you do that's durable? All these executive orders can be easily reversed with the next administration, or even maybe before, by the courts. What are you doing that's durable? And even if Trump wanted to do something that's durable, he doesn't have the power, because he has the narrowest margin in the House since there's been 50 states, since the 1950s, 75 years. And he's facing a Democrat filibuster in the Senate. So, sure, go ahead and freeze the money, but you're going to have to rescind it. Either the courts are going to tell you to rescind it, or the next administration's going to rescind it. But Trump is addicted to behaving like he behaves in the private sector, which is to bully people, to scare people, and beat your chest. But that's not how things work to become durable in government. You have to work within the system, and he does not know. And in fact, what he's doing is self-defeating. He's activating an opposition, and a lot of people are digging in their heels. And so it's very counterproductive. Levin talks about presidentialism, obviously something as a conservative that he's very much against. And he talks about how this began with Woodrow Wilson, the administrative state. And that was necessitated by World War I, but a lot of those structures continued. And are very unpopular among conservatives. And the Woodrow Wilson's illusion was only the president can speak for the entire country, and that he expresses the will of the people. He's going to dismantle that argument in just a second. But what Wilson could do and what Trump's trying to do is impoundment, that Congress passes, appropriates money for an action, and the president, who's supposed to enact that as the executive, decides he's not going to do it. And he impounds the money while he's deciding whether he will actually spend it. And Levin, the constitutional expert, says that's wrong, and they're going to lose in the courts, inevitably. This business about presidentialism is a total flip-flop. With Obama, it was, the president shouldn't have so much power. Mitch McConnell says, we'll make him a one-term president. And they started doing everything they could to stop Obama. The Tea Party starts up, the Freedom Caucus, they're all carrying around little booklets of the Constitution, and they're saying Obama is just as bad as Wilson, and they're saying just like Levin is saying, Congress is central, not Obama. He can't do it. Well, now they've flip-flopped, and now the Republicans in power, they're gone 180 degrees. And what he says is a nice little quote: "Where you sit determines where you stand." When your party's in power and controls the presidency, you're going to be not very concerned about budget overruns. He's a conservative. He says, I agree with some of the policies, but for me, constitutionalism is more important. What Congress, though, needs to look in the mirror. They can't just blame the president for seizing power. They have conceded a lot of the power. And what they mainly do now is raise money for the next election and tweet. And so that Congress is playing right into the hands of presidentialism. It's worsened by the administrative, some say deep state, but whenever these arguments come up, the best example to give to a conservative is a park ranger, a member of the deep state, and we've seen that there's a crisis at Yosemite now. If you look at what institution in our state is 100% federal, look at Yosemite. And the problem at this time of year is they're taking reservations and they're hiring new park rangers. Now, Rudy and Debbie, they are experts at going to Yosemite, and so what are the prospects for an upcoming trip in the spring or summer if there's chaos now? The other thing Levin takes on is this statement that President Trump should have the majority leader and speaker that he wants. And that was the Republicans' refrain. And Trump wanted this guy, Rick Scott, to replace Mitch McConnell. And he was very public about it. He was one of three guys running, and it was a secret ballot, and he came in third. So it was the Constitution working. It was a blow for presidentialism. And Levin makes the point that Congress should be more proud and exert its own authority, which it's not doing now. And it should at least have enough dignity to be authentic. And so the fact that this guy was not selected by secret ballot gives me some hope. And maybe a friend of mine recommends that every ballot in Congress be done first regularly out in the open, but there always be a parallel secret ballot. And only if the two ballots agree would something pass. If something doesn't pass by secret ballot, then you've got to take the issue back to the drawing board and see where the problem is. And I think it's an interesting proposal. When we talk about power and the separation of powers, we're not talking about one kind of power. We're talking about different kinds of power. And of course, in Levin's estimation, the power should reside in Congress. These 550 people. It doesn't look like there's 500 people there, but maybe. That in fact, even though Wilson said only the president can represent the country, no president can really represent the vast country. And that's one of the tenets of conservatism, that you've got to have a plural Congress, and they should set the agenda, and the president is only there to administer the will of Congress. Well, good luck with that. We've gone a long way past, but that's where conservatives think we should get back to, and that a president presides. That's the derivation of the word. The president presides and institutes the will of Congress. And then comes the third part. And right now, given that Congress is a self-imposed impotence, the courts review, and the courts are working overtime now. That's for sure. So this is one thing that this Project 2025 that got mentioned in the campaign and that has given Trump his marching orders, and everybody was so scared. They're making the same mistake. Their proposals are not court worthy. They're not going to stand up. Remember, even though Trump shifted the judiciary and appointed an awful lot of judges, in his first run, he lost. The Supreme Court blocked his attempt to cancel DACA. It stopped him from adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census. It stopped him from using defense funding to build a wall. It stopped him from targeting immigrants from Muslim countries. And remember, federal agencies under Trump faced 246 legal challenges. And I'll just give you a second. What number do you think were successful of those challenges? So 192 were successful, and Trump prevailed only 54 times. The problem with a lot of Trump's initiative is they're using untested legal theories that, like, for instance, declaring a state of war on our borders. And we'll see, but it didn't work the first time around. DACA, Obama actually said this, that when Congress can't act, I will. And that's what he said when he instituted DACA. Unfortunately, that has prevailed with court backing. But a conservative would not like that. Every modern president has done the overreach and acting when Congress doesn't. But then you get into this vicious cycle, and Congress just stops doing their job and just goes to raising money and tweeting. And why take political heat? If the executive is willing to do it, good. I'll just make phone calls for money and not have to face editorials against my action. The new power, the fourth power, is the extra constitutional power of political parties. And the president often acts more as the head of a party than the head of an executive branch that's supposed to institute the will of Congress. The predominance of political parties, a big problem for people like Yuval Levin. So the worst thing, though, is the parties are taking power, but they're failing. And what are they failing to do? They're failing to form a durable majority. Over the last 30 years, there's been no durable majority, really. Reagan had one, lasted 8 years, and another 4 years for his vice president. But Clinton had 8 years, but Gore should have won if it hadn't have been for Monica Lewinsky, I'd submit. Sure, there were other reasons. But the contingencies of history, we can only dream about Gore presidency, and it would have avoided certainly the problem of Iraq. And then W. Bush, he couldn't build a durable majority, given the mismanagement of the finances and the global recession that his management of finances and banks unleashed. And then Obama, unfortunately, he was lenient on the banks. I think we all agree he should have pounded his fist a little bit more and been a populist. That's what the country wanted, and that was compounded by Hillary, who paid more attention to special interest groups than she paid to blue collar workers in the upper Midwest. So Levin makes the point that the founding fathers said majorities are very dangerous. And they're dangerous to minorities. And so we're going to do something about that. And it made it so a majority couldn't do much until it had grown and broadened its base before they could enact something. And Trump is failing to broaden that base again, though of some concern to Democrats, as did do better with Latinos and blacks. So let's hope the Democrats can respond to that. Does Trump have a mandate if he gets 1.5% more? No. And the Constitution, especially in this situation, would say you have to deal with the people you defeated. And Trump is not doing that at all. But they're still in Congress. They're in charge of the state governments, thank God, the state of California. If you look through the lens of parties, though, they reject that logic. They say, hey, we got a majority, let's go big time. And that's the logic of the parliamentary system, which we don't have. But that's the kind of problem you'd expect to run into in Britain. Our system, Congress is supposed to be at the center, and they're supposed to be negotiating across party lines to come up with solutions to problems. And it's always, it started out that way, and it should be that way, but the last 30 years, not so much. And so what we want is bargaining and deal making. Trump can bully Colombia on immigration. Congratulations. But he lost Obamacare repeal attempts repeatedly. As one wag said, Trump was no Hitler. Hitler could have repealed Obamacare. But this is the moment, and I think I certainly remember it. Those that are interested in healthcare remember it. It was when John McCain came and gave thumbs down to Trump's attempt to repeal Obamacare. This is McCain, and this is his thumb. Helping us relive that moment, and particularly in a moment like now. But Levin's point is the more central and bigger a president is, the less likely you're going to be able to get something bipartisan through. If you're a president standing astride legislation and pounding his chest, he's not going to get votes from across the aisle. And he credits Biden with understanding that and not making the heroic pose and getting bills like the CHIPS and Science bill and the infrastructure bill. We remember how much Trump talked about his infrastructure bill, and he never got it passed because it was always his infrastructure bill, and Democrats wouldn't touch it. this goes back to the beginning, and he makes a point that I hadn't appreciated. When Washington was president, Alexander made the mistake of just starting to write legislation like he had done with the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. But that's not how the system was supposed to work. And Madison tried to talk some sense to it. Just keep your hands off. Let Congress work this out, and then Congress will own it. But Hamilton kept writing his own bills, and the opposition wouldn't vote for Hamilton's bills. So that's why he ultimately was unsuccessful in Congress. As successful as he had been at in writing the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, as we saw in the musical. The president is often strongest is when he lets Congress work it out. Well, what about in our lifetimes? I mean, I was alive when FDR was alive a few years, and his New Deal. We remember that. We remember the Great Society. Yeah, sure, LBJ understood the Congress. He in many ways, as the great biography series about him points out, 4 volumes. We're still waiting for the 5th. He understood Congress, but he got the Great Society done by delegating a lot of that. Reagan, the same thing on the tax bill that he's known for. He worked from a distance and got a tax bill through that he gets credit for. The other point about negotiating with Congress, it's a great way to get information into the legislative system.
I know, please.
A great way to get information into the legislative system. So the example he gives is Joe Manchin, who seemed to thwart a lot of what Biden was trying to do. But Joe Manchin had a sense that if overspending would have caused inflation, at least this is what Levin proposes, and the inflation problem would have been even worse if Manchin had not been able to stop the overspending. So what's Elon Musk doing to this theory of legislation? He's really screwing it up by terrifying anybody who even hints they'll oppose Trump's legislation. So what he's doing is by intimidation is shutting off wisdom from the legislature that might flow into the construction of bills and spending. So he thinks that what Musk is doing is fostering bad decisions. And we will see. We will see. So Project 2025 drew the wrong lesson. The first time around, it didn't work because Trump was being restrained. Just let him be himself, and you're going to do a lot better. Nobody should say no to Donald Trump. And this is very bad for decision making, Levin says. We've already talked about that example. So character is destiny. And this business of choosing people who look good on television and people that can fight and exert dominance it's very erratic, and you're not going to get good small decisions that are essential for big ones. It's really a cult of personality, and I've mentioned this movie before, Idiocracy, which is the cult of personality run wild, if you want to laugh. The Democrats, they also reflected the character of their leaders. So with Obama, it was highly intellectual. With Biden, he was so much into coalition maintenance and trying to make everybody happy. He didn't want anybody to be unhappy. And that led to unfocused attempts in the early part. He picked up at the end, and I think he wound up with a successful presidency. We'll see. But he was a master of building the big tent, and Levin gives him credit for that.
Wait a minute, John. Sorry, but your cartoon is at odds with your text. That's the moderates being kicked out of the big tent. So,
Levin's point, from his point of view, that if there had been a Sister Souljah moment, now that's not moderates. I grant you that. But I think his point, and I'll just maybe I didn't choose a good example, but Levin's point was that Democrats lost in 2024 because they were seen as pandering to their coalition of many different groups, and so maybe that's the point. He maintains that both Trump and Biden were very weak presidents. Both of them had a hard time focusing and building on things that were durable. I disagree with that for Biden, and so does another guy. The earliest read that we got ranking presidents, granted, this guy is from a progressive institute, but where does he rank Biden among all the presidents? He ranks at 13th, right in front of Bill Clinton, in fact. And here I won't read the reasons, but in particular for Biden, it was COVID-19 and infrastructure and climate action. And I like this ranking too because it ranks Jimmy Carter ahead of James Madison. Don't know about that, but he gets this one right. George W. Bush is at the very bottom, right behind Richard Nixon, even because of Iraq, which I can't get out of my mind. So Ezra, he thanks Yuval Levin for speaking in measured tones, but Levin has to come in at the very end with a caveat. Well, Ezra, I wouldn't say I've been feeling all that measured. So here's Levin's caveat. Chaos. Things could go very bad at the Supreme Court. They're pushing hard. The pardons for January 6th were terrible. The removal of security, all these things give Levin pause. So Ezra says, well, what would make you unmeasured? What would really frighten you? And something that we've seen done in other countries, what would it be? And then the day after this, I heard this. Trump talked about his view of presidential power with apparent reference to Napoleon. Trump said, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." So Napoleon may have said that, or he may have said, "I did not usurp the crown. I found it in the gutter. I picked it up with my sword, and it was the people that put it on my head." Well, the people didn't put the crown on his head. He took the crown out of the hands of the Pope and put it on his own head, by the way. Unmeasured, he'd say, what would make him unmeasured if the administration did not abide by court orders? Well, that's a pretty low bar. So far, he points out they're operating within the system. They've already pulled back after one court said no. The first case that's going to get to the Supreme Court is a firing of a guy named Dellinger, who was from the Office of Special Counsel, the government watchdog. And Trump's lawyers are challenging that by saying, can the courts dictate to the president how long an employee has to serve against Trump's will? And Dellinger had a 5-year term that's not up yet, that was set by a congressional statute. So we'll see where the Supreme Court lines up on that. Levin concedes what happened after 2020 election should have rendered Trump ineligible, but the voters reelected him. In the campaign, Kamala said that Trump was unserious, and it seems like the electorate is also unserious, which is sad. So I'm going to end up with the final question. I think it was on our minds last week. J.D. Vance made some disturbing comments. Ezra asked Levin about that and alluded to Vance's connection to this new right, the common man, needs extraordinary and emergency measures, and that Trump has been summoned by the age. From the Wall Street Journal's point of view, this is a more of a leftist leaning, and so the allusion to the common man might do that. Michael.
Well, no, you finish, and then I was going to make a comment.
Okay. Levin makes a point that one side tends to overestimate the strength and success of the other side. And so he's suggesting to Ezra, you're looking at J.D. Vance and thinking that the new right is stronger than it is. And J.D. Vance is looking at the left and overestimating how strong it is. And there's talk about throwing away the Constitution, but that's not just on the right. We have Harvard and Yale professors talking about how unfair our Constitution is in the Senate and the Electoral College. So this is a two-way street. They packed the Supreme Court. And I'll end here. He says, I have respect and regard for J.D. Vance. I think he's a serious person. He says, I could be wrong, but he doesn't think that he's as bad as a lot of us do. So, Michael.
Well, all of this stuff from Levin is, I guess my feeling is these people somehow have this idea that the Trump people had not learned from his first administration. And I beg to differ on the Project 2025. That's a playbook that was carefully thought out. And I just don't get the sense that this time around, they may be starting out right now looking like they're flailing and creating chaos. But I think they've got a whole lot of ideas and plans. And I really believe they want to take over in a fashion that will guarantee them, at least for the next 2 years. Everybody's saying, well, wait till the midterms, that kind of thing. But I really, really am not as optimistic as Levin is, and thinking that somehow the system is going to survive this. I mean, I was talking to somebody and here's an example. If it comes to some kind of uprising and people speaking out against what Trump is doing, and he orders the military to fire on civilians, they will do it under Trump's orders. And we'll have the kind of problem. I mean, it happened at Kent State and one person got killed. But, Trump will be the kind of guy who would tell the military, fire on them. They're a bunch of rabble rousers and so on. And no constitution is going to help you when a bullet is coming your way. And my last comment is great republics come and great republics go. And we may be optimistic and say that somehow we can survive this, but just to say that somehow the courts are going to be the one place to rescue us, or maybe the legislative branch is going to somehow rescue us. I don't know. I'm very, very dubious. I mean, it just, I know that to be dismissive and so on and say, well, the legislative branch was supposed to originally be in control, but ever since Roosevelt, the legislative branch has been more or less the taking orders from the executive branch, I'd say. The president, he gives his State of the Union message and he lays out his legislative wish list. And so this sort of thing. And I just think that the legislative branch and the judicial branch right now are not going to be guardrails against Trump and his minions. And I don't think Project 2025 is to be taken lightly.
Can't argue with it. I presented it because it was the most optimistic thing I could find.
But I'd like to comment on, was it Dellinger's dismissal or refusal to be dismissed? And I wonder if the era of principled resignation isn't over, that it's since My Lai, I thought it was now encoded in federal law that you do not have to, in fact, should not, must not obey an illegal order. So I wonder if the better strategy is it the one who refused, who was dismissed, is it over the Adams case, Mayor Adams?
Yeah.
And he's fired and he'll sue. I think maybe that keeps it before the public longer, and it might be upheld. Now the honorable resigning instead of carrying out something that you believe is illegal is out of date. That's from a different period of dignified behavior on both sides.
Yeah. I think that Dellinger, though, I think the position that he had as a special prosecutor was a little bit more defined than in the New York office. those attorneys. I have some lawyer friends, and they think Sassoon is a hero.
Sassoon is the one who
Yeah,
was fired or who resigned.
She
yeah,
resigned.
she resigned. But I'll ask him again.
Okay.
Can I share something?
Well, wait, after Jim, he's had his hand up.
My question was this interview of Klein's before or after Vance gave his speeches in Europe?
Before.
Yeah, because the speeches in Europe really are alarming. That the telling Europe who to give credence to, the far right and so forth. I mean, I wonder if he might have had a different take after what Vance said in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll look it up. I'll see if he has. By the way, next week we are going to look at foreign policy and what the hell are Republicans thinking about foreign policy, especially Marco Rubio. How is he going on with surrender to Putin? I just don't understand it.
That's mind-boggling to me. I can't imagine how the well, with Ukraine, I mean, how many people are involved with Ukraine? You think they're going to go peacefully? I don't think so. I mean, that's kind of my take on it, is that they're going to go down fighting. And so regardless of whatever Rubio comes up with starting peace talks with the Russians.
Yeah, Aiko.
Can you share the screen, share with me? Oh, okay, great. So, I just want to bring up a thing that I saw on the internet, and it's really kind of interesting, because look at how many vetoes Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave, and we're just only 9 of that was overridden. And of course, he was in power much longer than most. But look at where way down here, Joe Biden's only 13, and Barack Obama's 12, and Donald Trump is 10. Maybe he's learned to start using his power now, and he'll start being more like the ones up here. But it is interesting that, he didn't use much of his powers in the beginning.
He doesn't have an oppositional
He
Congress.
doesn't have to.
Yeah, there.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, well,
no
right now
passing
that's
bill.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens when he's got the Congress on his side.
But look how many Truman and Eisenhower did when I was in my formative years. Quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they had
Mhm.
oppositional Congress, so they're going to veto a lot.
Yeah.
You don't have, if the party in power in Congress is the same as yours, you're not going to be vetoing much.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
Thank you, John. Wonderful
All right.
presentation.
Thank you.
Good presentation, although I don't
Yeah.
agree with it.
Lots to think about, though. Yeah.
See you
Well,
next week, I hope.
yeah. Yeah.
Gotta keep
Bye-bye.
smiling.
Yeah.
John,
Yeah.
what'd you think of Jeff Smith's article?
Yeah. Let's see. I've got to stop taping. I haven't.
Oh, okay.
I don't see how I can do it. Where is it? I can't figure out how to stop taping, so I'm gonna end the meeting. Why don't you come right back on?